The cafeteria was buzzing with noise as trays clattered and students filled every table. Laughter echoed through the room, but in one corner sat Emma, the quiet girl who preferred the background over the spotlight. She kept her head down, eating her sandwich with calm focus, while the chaos of high school life swirled around her. But not everyone was content to leave her alone. Jake, the loud bully of the school, spotted Emma sitting quietly and smirked to his friends. "Watch this," he said, swaggering toward her with a tray piled high with food, his voice booming across the cafeteria. He towered over her table, his shadow stretching across her lunch as he leaned in, grinning. "You always sit here like a little mouse, Emma. Why don't you lighten up?" Emma looked up briefly, her calm eyes meeting his, but she said nothing. Jake laughed at her silence, then pretended to stumble his tray, tilting dangerously as mashed potatoes and gravy threatened to spill across her clothes. Gasps and chuckles rippled through the cafeteria, everyone expecting Emma to panic or run. But what happened next was not what anyone expected. In a flash, Emma stood, her hand shooting out to grab the tray before it tipped. The move was so fast, so precise, that Jake froze, staring at her grip. The cafeteria went silent, the loudest voice suddenly silenced by the quiet girl he tried to humiliate. Emma pushed the tray back toward Jake with steady force, her eyes locked on his. Not a word left her mouth, but her stance, her calm strength spoke louder than anything she could have said. Jake tried to laugh it off, shoving at her shoulder, but his smirk faltered when Emma barely moved. It was then everyone realized Emma was not the fragile target they thought she was. She had a fire in her that none of them had ever seen before, and Jake was about to find out just how wrong he had been. The students leaned forward in their seats, eyes wide as the tension thickened. Jake clenched his jaw, trying to regain control of the moment. He pushed harder this time, expecting Emma to stumble back. But Emma planted her feet firm on the floor, her calm expression never changing as she resisted his shove without flinching. A murmur spread through the cafeteria, whispers racing from table to table as everyone watched the quiet girl stand her ground. Jake grew red in the face, his pride stung by the fact that Emma was not reacting the way he had imagined. He tried to laugh louder, his voice cracking as he shouted, "Come on, Mouse, what are you gonna do?" Emma finally spoke, her voice steady and clear. "Stop calling me that." The words were simple, but the firmness behind them made the cafeteria fall even quieter. Jake sneered, but his confidence was slipping. His friends, who once cheered, now looked uncertain. Emma pushed the tray firmly against his chest, forcing him to take a step back, his own balance faltering. The crowd gasped, some students clapping quietly, others covering their mouths as they realized the bully was losing ground. Jake growled, his pride unraveling as he lunged forward, trying to shove her with both hands. But Emma moved with sharp precision, sidestepping his push and guiding his arm past her body, making him stumble against the table behind her. The cafeteria erupted with noise, this time not laughter at Emma, but cheers for her quick reflexes. Jake spun around, his face pale and his breathing heavy, his eyes darting between Emma and the crowd that was no longer on his side. Emma stood tall, her expression calm but her presence unshakable, as if she had been waiting for this moment all along. Jake clenched his fists, trying to cover his embarrassment with anger, but his hands trembled as he faced Emma. She stood in place, calm and steady, her eyes locked on him with a focus that made him hesitate. The students around them were no longer silent. They were chanting her name, whispering in excitement, urging her on, as if she had suddenly become the hero of the moment. Jake swung his arm out in frustration, aiming to knock her tray off the table, but Emma reacted quicker than anyone thought possible. She caught his wrist mid-swing, her grip tight and unyielding, the sudden stop forcing Jake to freeze in shock. Gasps filled the cafeteria, some students rising from their seats, unable to believe what they were seeing. Emma leaned closer, her voice low but firm. "You do not get to treat people like this anymore." Jake tried to pull back, but Emma held firm, her strength surprising everyone, including him. The crowd erupted again, this time with cheers louder than ever as Jake struggled to free himself. His face turned red, not from exertion but from the humiliation of being overpowered in front of the entire cafeteria. Emma finally released his wrist, letting him stumble back into his friends, who were now avoiding his eyes. She straightened her shoulders and sat back down at her table as if nothing had happened. The cafeteria roared with applause and laughter, but not at her this time. It was at Jake, the bully, who had been exposed for what he truly was. Emma calmly picked up her sandwich and took a bite. Her silence, now louder than any shout could ever be. Jake stood frozen, his pride shattered as the cafeteria echoed with claps and cheers. His friends who once hyped him up now backed away, embarrassed to even be near him. Emma did not look up. She chewed her food calmly, as if the entire scene had not rattled her in the slightest. That calmness burned Jake more than anything else, her refusal to even acknowledge him as a threat. He slammed his tray down on a nearby table, the sound loud enough to hush the crowd for a moment. "This isn't over," he barked, his voice cracking as he tried to hold on to the scraps of his reputation. But no one cheered this time, no one laughed with him. Instead, the cafeteria filled with quiet chuckles that were aimed at him, not with him. Emma raised her eyes, just once meeting his glare with an expression that was steady and unafraid. Then she lowered her gaze back to her meal, her silence cutting deeper than any words could. Jake turned on his heels, storming toward the doors, but the sound of mocking laughter followed him every step. For the first time in a long while, the cafeteria felt different. The quiet girl everyone ignored had shown a strength none of them expected. And from that day forward, whispers of her name spread through the school, not as the mouse Jake had called her, but as the girl who stood tall when no one else dared. The cafeteria slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but the energy had shifted completely. Students kept sneaking glances at Emma, their eyes filled with a new sense of respect and curiosity. Some even left their tables to walk past her, offering small nods or quiet words of support as they passed. Emma acknowledged them with the faintest of smiles, but she kept her calm composure as if she had simply done what needed to be done. At a far corner of the room, two teachers had witnessed the commotion. They exchanged looks, whispering to one another about what had just happened. Jake, meanwhile, lingered outside the cafeteria, fuming, pacing back and forth, his pride wounded deeper than any bruise could reach. He had built his reputation on fear, on making others feel small, but Emma had shattered that in front of everyone. Inside, Emma finished her meal and stood gathering her tray with deliberate calmness, her movements steady and unhurried. As she walked toward the trash bins, the crowd parted slightly, their eyes following her every step. She did not speak, she did not gloat, she simply carried herself with a quiet strength that left an even bigger mark than the fight itself. Whispers followed her down the hallway as she left the cafeteria, her name spreading faster than wildfire through the school. Emma had gone from invisible to unforgettable in a single afternoon, and though she remained silent, everyone knew this was only the beginning of a much larger change. As Emma stepped into the hallway, the chatter of students spilled out behind her like a wave. She could hear fragments of conversation, her name being repeated, mixed with disbelief and admiration. Some students hurried past her, whispering, "Did you see how fast she moved?" while others shook their heads, still stunned that the quietest girl in school had stood up to Jake. Emma kept walking, her expression calm, but her thoughts were racing. For years she had chosen silence, keeping her head low to avoid trouble, yet in one moment, everything had changed. She passed by a row of lockers where a group of younger students looked up at her wide-eyed, their faces filled with awe. Emma gave them a small nod and kept moving, but inside, she felt something new stir, a strength she had always kept hidden, now revealed for the world to see. Back in the cafeteria, Jake shoved through the doors, his face still red with humiliation. His friends tried to console him, but their words sounded empty, even to themselves. The power he once held over everyone had cracked, and he knew it. People had laughed at him, not with him, and worst of all, they had cheered for Emma. Emma reached her next class and quietly took her seat, her classmates sneaking glances at her from across the room. The teacher entered and began the lesson, but the students' minds were far from their books. They were still replaying the cafeteria scene in their heads. Emma sat quietly, her pencil moving across her notebook, but her presence carried a new weight, one that no one could ignore anymore. Emma kept her focus on the page in front of her, though the weight of every stare pressed against her back. She had grown used to silence and being overlooked, but now silence felt different. It was filled with questions, curiosity, and a touch of admiration. A note slid onto her desk, folded neatly. She glanced at it before opening. Inside were the words, "You were amazing today," written in careful handwriting. She looked around, but no one admitted to sending it. Her lips curved into the smallest smile before she tucked the note into her notebook and returned to her work. Across the school, Jake was still fuming, storming down the hallways, replaying the moment over and over in his mind. Every time he thought about the look in Emma's eyes, the calm, unshaken gaze, it unsettled him more than the laughter that followed. For the first time, he wondered if he was losing control of the power he had always taken for granted. The afternoon passed slowly, whispers following Emma from class to class. Students who had never spoken to her before offered quiet greetings in the hallways, some even walking beside her as if standing near her carried its own kind of pride. Emma never bragged, never raised her voice. She simply moved through the day as though nothing unusual had happened. But by the time the final bell rang, everyone in the school knew that Emma was no longer the girl who blended into the background. She was the girl who had stood against the loudest bully and won. When the final bell rang, Emma packed her books slowly, giving the crowd of students time to rush past her. Even then, she could feel the eyes on her, some curious, some admiring, and a few filled with newfound respect. As she stepped into the hallway, the sound of lockers slamming echoed around her, mixed with the constant hum of voices whispering her name. She walked with the same calm stride she always had, but now the air seemed to shift as students parted slightly when she passed, making space, as if they sensed her presence carried weight. Jake leaned against a locker at the far end of the hall, his arms crossed, his glare sharp but his posture tense. His friends stood nearby, quieter than usual, their energy drained by the earlier humiliation, none of them eager to relive it. When Emma approached, he straightened his back, puffing his chest, as if ready for another confrontation. But she walked right past him without a word, her silence louder than any insult she could have thrown. The students nearby noticed and smirked, some even shaking their heads at Jake, who was left standing awkwardly in her shadow. Emma exited the building, stepping into the afternoon sun, her face calm, her breath steady. The world outside felt wider, brighter, as though the walls that once kept her hidden had finally fallen away. She had not sought attention or glory, yet it had found her, and in that moment Emma realized that staying quiet no longer meant staying unseen. Emma crossed the schoolyard, her bag slung over one shoulder, the late afternoon breeze tugging gently at her hair. Clusters of students lingered on the grass and near the buses, and many of them turned to watch her pass, their conversations pausing mid-sentence. She could feel the weight of their attention, but she carried herself the same way she always had, calm, steady, deliberate. Near the edge of the yard, a group of younger students whispered excitedly, one of them pointing shyly in her direction. Emma paused for a moment, meeting their wide eyes before giving a small nod that made them grin with pride. For them, it was not just about the fight in the cafeteria, it was proof that someone quiet, someone overlooked, could still stand tall against someone louder and stronger. Behind her, Jake stormed out of the building, his jaw tight, his fists clenched, his pride still raw. He caught sight of Emma across the yard, and for a brief moment, he hesitated, his usual swagger gone, replaced by uncertainty. The students around him did not cheer for him anymore. They did not step aside with the same fear they once did. Instead, their gazes shifted to Emma, as though the balance of power had shifted overnight. Emma reached the sidewalk at the edge of campus, her steps unhurried, her thoughts steady. She knew Jake would not give up easily, but she also knew he no longer frightened her. What had changed was not her strength, but her decision to use it, and that choice had altered everything around her. Jake stood frozen at the edge of the schoolyard, watching Emma walk away. The laughter and support he once thrived on were gone, replaced with quiet smirks and whispers that cut deeper than any words. For the first time, he felt the weight of being powerless and the sting of being ignored. Emma did not look back. She did not need to. Her silence had already spoken louder than any fight could. As she reached the corner of the street, the younger students who had watched earlier waved at her, their faces lit with admiration. Emma lifted her hand slightly, in return her calm presence stronger than ever. From that day forward, the halls of the school changed. Jake no longer walked them with the same loud arrogance, his voice quieter, his shadow smaller. And Emma, though still quiet, carried a new kind of power, not in words or force, but in the unshakable strength that came from standing up when it mattered most. The girl once invisible had become unforgettable, and her story spread through the school as a reminder that true strength is not about being loud, but about being unafraid. And in the silence she chose, Emma found her voice.